Chapters 46 and 47 of Don Quixote, Volume 2. Chapters 46 and 47. Chapter 46. Of the terrible bell and cat fright that Don Quixote got in the course of the enamoured Altisidora's wooing. We left Don Quixote wrapped up in the reflections which the music of the enamoured maid Altisidora had given rise to. He went to bed with them, and just like the fleas they would not let him sleep or get a moment's rest, and the broken stitches of his stockings helped them. But as time is fleet and no obstacle can stay his course, he came riding on the hours, and morning very soon arrived. Seeing which, Don Quixote quitted the soft down, and, nowise slothful, dressed himself in his chamois suit, and put on his travelling boots to hide the disaster to his stockings. He threw over him his scarlet mantle, put on his head a montera of green velvet trimmed with silver edging, flung across his shoulder the baldric with his good trenchant sword, took up a large rosary that he always carried with him, and with great solemnity and precision of gait proceeded to the antechamber where the Duke and Duchess were already dressed and waiting for him. But as he passed through a gallery, Altisidora and the other damsel, her friend, were lying in wait for him, and the instant Altisidora saw him she pretended to faint, while her friend caught her in her lap and began hastily unlacing the bosom of her dress. Don Quixote observed it, and approaching them said, "I know very well what this seizure arises from." "I know not from what," replied the friend, "for Altisidora is the healthiest damsel in all this house, and I have never heard her complain all the time I have known her. A plague on all the knights errant in the world, if they be all ungrateful. Go away, Señor Don Quixote, for this poor child will not come to herself again so long as you are here." To which Don Quixote returned, "Do me the favour, señora, to let a lute be placed in my chamber tonight, and I will comfort this poor maiden to the best of my power, for in the early stages of love a prompt dissolution is an approved remedy." And with this he retired, so as not to be remarked by any who might see him there. He had scarcely withdrawn when Altisidora, recovering from her swoon, said to her companion, "The lute must be left, for no doubt Don Quixote intends to give us some music, and being his it will not be bad." They went at once to inform the Duchess of what was going on, and of the lute Don Quixote asked for, and she, delighted beyond measure, plotted with the Duke and her two damsels to play him a trick that should be amusing but harmless. And in high glee they waited for night, which came quickly as the day had come, and as for the day, the Duke and Duchess spent it in charming conversation with Don Quixote. When 11 o'clock came, Don Quixote found a guitar in his chamber. He tried it, opened the window, and perceived that some persons were walking in the garden, and having passed his fingers over the frets of the guitar, and tuned it as well as he could, he spat and cleared his chest, and then with a voice a little hoarse but full-toned, he sang the following ballad, which he had himself that day composed. Mighty love the hearts of maidens doth unsettle and perplex, and the instrument he uses most of all is idleness. Sewing, stitching, any labour, having always work to do, to the poison love instilleth, is the antidote most sure. And to proper-minded maidens, who desire the matron's name, modesty's a marriage portion, modesty their highest praise. Men of prudence and discretion, courtiers gay and gallant knights, with the wanton damsels dally, but the modest take to wife. There are passions transient fleeting, loves in hostelries declared, sunrise loves with sunset ended, when the guest hath gone his way. Love that springs up swift and sudden, here today, tomorrow flown, passes, leaves no trace behind it, leaves no image on the soul. Painting that is laid on painting maketh no display or show, where one beauty in possession, there no other can take hold. Dulcinea del Toboso painted on my heart I wear, never from its tablets, never can her image be erased. The quality of all in lovers most esteemed is constancy. It is by this that love works wonders, this exalts them to the skies. Don Quixote had got so far with his song, to which the Duke, the Duchess, Altisidora, and nearly the whole household of the castle were listening, when all of a sudden from a gallery above that was exactly over his window they let down a cord with more than 100 bells attached to it, and immediately after that discharged a great sack full of cats, which also had bells of smaller size tied to their tails. Such was the din of the bells and the squalling of the cats, that though the Duke and Duchess were the contrivers of the joke, they were startled by it, while Don Quixote stood paralyzed with fear; and as luck would have it, 2 or 3 of the cats made their way in through the grating of his chamber, and flying from one side to the other, made it seem as if there were a legion of devils at large in it. They extinguished the candles that were burning in the room, and rushed about seeking some way of escape. The cord with the large bells never ceased rising and falling, and most of the people of the castle, not knowing what was really the matter, were at their wits' end with astonishment. Don Quixote sprang to his feet, and drawing his sword, began making passes at the grating, shouting out, "Avaunt, malignant enchanters! Avaunt, ye witchcraft-working rabble! I am Don Quixote of La Mancha, against whom your evil machinations avail not nor have any power." And turning upon the cats that were running about the room, he made several cuts at them. They dashed at the grating and escaped by it, save one that, finding itself hard pressed by the slashes of Don Quixote's sword, flew at his face and held on to his nose tooth and nail, with the pain of which he began to shout his loudest. The Duke and Duchess hearing this, and guessing what it was, ran with all haste to his room, and as the poor gentleman was striving with all his might to detach the cat from his face, they opened the door with a master key, and went in with lights and witnessed the unequal combat. The Duke ran forward to part the combatants, but Don Quixote cried out aloud, "Let no one take him from me! Leave me hand to hand with this demon, this wizard, this enchanter. I will teach him, I myself, who Don Quixote of La Mancha is." The cat, however, never minding these threats, snarled and held on, but at last the Duke pulled it off and flung it out of the window. Don Quixote was left with a face as full of holes as a sieve, and a nose not in very good condition, and greatly vexed that they did not let him finish the battle he had been so stoutly fighting with that villain of an enchanter. They sent for some oil of Johnswort, and Altisidora herself, with her own fair hands, bandaged all the wounded parts, and as she did so she said to him in a low voice, "All these mishaps have befallen thee, kind-hearted knight, for the sin of thy insensibility and obstinacy, and God grant thy squire Sancho may forget to whip himself, so that that dearly beloved Dulcinea of thine may never be released from her enchantment, that thou mayest never come to her bed, at least while I, who adore thee, am alive." To all this Don Quixote made no answer except to heave deep sighs, and then stretched himself on his bed, thanking the Duke and Duchess for their kindness, not because he stood in any fear of that bell-ringing rabble of enchanters in cat shape, but because he recognized their good intentions in coming to his rescue. The Duke and Duchess left him to repose, and withdrew greatly grieved at the unfortunate result of the joke. They had never thought the adventure would have fallen so heavy on Don Quixote, or cost him so dear, for it cost him 5 days of confinement to his bed, during which he had another adventure, pleasanter than the late one, which his chronicler will not relate just now, in order that he may turn his attention to Sancho Panza, who was proceeding with great diligence and drollery in his government. Chapter 47, wherein is continued the account of how Sancho Panza conducted himself in his government. The history says that from the justice court they carried Sancho to a sumptuous palace, where in a spacious chamber there was a table laid out with royal magnificence. The clarions sounded as Sancho entered the room, and 4 pages came forward to present him with water for his hands, which Sancho received with great dignity. The music ceased, and Sancho seated himself at the head of the table, for there was only that seat placed, and no more than one cover laid. A personage, who it appeared afterwards was a physician, placed himself standing by his side, with a whalebone wand in his hand. They then lifted up a fine white cloth covering fruit and a great variety of dishes of different sorts. One who looked like a student said grace, and a page put a laced bib on Sancho, while another who played the part of head carver placed a dish of fruit before him. But hardly had he tasted a morsel, when the man with the wand touched the plate with it, and they took it away from before him with utmost celerity. The carver, however, brought him another dish, and Sancho proceeded to try it, but before he could get at it, not to say taste it, already the wand had touched it, and a page had carried it off with the same promptitude as the fruit. Sancho, seeing this, was puzzled, and looking from one to another, asked if this dinner was to be eaten after the fashion of a jugglery trick. To this he with the wand replied, It is not to be eaten, señor governor, except as is usual and customary in other islands where there are governors. I, señor, am a physician, and I am paid a salary in this island to serve its governors as such, and I have a much greater regard for their health than for my own, studying day and night and making myself acquainted with the governor's constitution, in order to be able to cure him when he falls sick. The chief thing I have to do is to attend at his dinners and suppers, and allow him to eat what appears to me to be fit for him, and keep from him what I think will do him harm and be injurious to his stomach, and therefore I ordered that plate of fruit to be removed as being too moist, and that other dish I ordered to be removed as being too hot and containing many spices that stimulate thirst, for he who drinks much kills and consumes the radical moisture wherein life consists. Well then, said Sancho, that dish of roast partridges there, that seems so savoury, will not do me any harm. To this the physician replied, Of those my lord the governor shall not eat so long as I live. Why so? Said Sancho. Because, replied the doctor, our master Hippocrates, the pole star and beacon of medicine, says in one of his aphorisms, Omnis saturatio mala, perdicis autem pessima, which means, all repletion is bad, but that of partridge is the worst of all. In that case, said Sancho, let señor doctor see among the dishes that are on the table what will do me most good and least harm, and let me eat it, without tapping it with his stick, for by the life of the governor, and so may God suffer me to enjoy it, but I'm dying of hunger, and in spite of the doctor and all he may say, to deny me food is the way to take my life instead of prolonging it. Your worship is right, señor governor, said the physician, and therefore your worship, I consider, should not eat of these stewed rabbits there, because it is a furry kind of food. If that veal were not roasted, and served with pickles, you might try it, but it is out of the question. That big dish that is smoking farther off, said Sancho, seems to me to be an olla podrida, and out of the diversity of things in such ollas, I cannot fail to light upon something tasty and good for me. Absit, said the doctor, far from us be any such base thought. There is nothing in the world less nourishing than an olla podrida. To canons, or rectors of colleges, or peasants' weddings, with your ollas podridas, but let us have none of them on the tables of governors, where everything that is present should be delicate and refined, and the reason is, that always, everywhere and by everybody, simple medicines are more esteemed than compound ones, for we cannot go wrong in those that are simple, while in the compound we may, by merely altering the quantity of the things composing them. But what I am of the opinion the governor should eat now, in order to preserve and fortify his health, is 100 or so of wafer cakes and a few thin slices of conserve of quinces, which shall settle his stomach and help his digestion. Sancho, on hearing this, threw himself back in his chair and surveyed the doctor steadily, and in a solemn tone asked him what his name was, and where he had studied. He replied, My name, señor governor, is Dr. Pedro Recio de Agüero. I am a native of the place called Tirteafuera, which lies between Caracuel and Almodovar del Campo, on the right-hand side, and I have the degree of doctor from the University of Osuna. To which Sancho, glowing all over with rage, returned, Then let Dr. Pedro Recio de Malaguero, native of Tirteafuera, a place that's on the right-hand side as we go from Caracuel to Almodovar del Campo, graduate of Osuna, get out of my presence at once, or I swear by the sun I'll take a cudgel, and by dint of blows, beginning with him, I'll not leave a doctor in the whole island, at least of those I know to be ignorant, for as to learned, wise, sensible physicians, them I will reverence and honour as divine persons. Once more I say let Pedro Recio get out of this, or I'll take this chair I am sitting on and break it over his head, and if they call me to account for it, I'll clear myself by saying I served God in killing a bad doctor, a general executioner. And now give me something to eat, or else take your government, for a trade that does not feed its master is not worth 2 beans. The doctor was dismayed when he saw the governor in such a passion, and he would have made a Tirteafuera out of the room, but at the same instant a post-horn sounded on the street, and the carver, putting his head out of the window, turned round and said, It's a courier from my lord the duke, no doubt some dispatch of importance. The courier came in, all sweating and flurried, and taking a paper from his bosom, placed it in the governor's hands. Sancho handed it to the majordomo and bade him read the superscription, which ran thus, to Don Sancho Panza, governor to the island of Barataria, into his own hands or those of his secretary. Sancho, when he heard this, said, "Which of you is my secretary?" "I am, señor," said one of those present, "for I can read and write, and am a Biscayan." "With that addition," said Sancho, "you might be secretary to the emperor himself. Open this paper and see what it says." The new-born secretary obeyed, and having read the contents, said the matter was one to be discussed in private. Sancho ordered the chamber to be cleared, the majordomo and the carver only remaining, so the doctor and the others withdrew, and then the secretary read the letter, which was as follows: "It has come to my knowledge, Señor Don Sancho Panza, that certain enemies of mine and of the island are about to make a furious attack upon it some night, I know not when. It behooves you to be on the alert and keep watch, that they surprise you not. I also know by trustworthy spies that 4 persons have entered the town in disguise in order to take your life, because they stand in dread of your great capacity. Keep your eyes open and take heed who approaches you to address you, and eat nothing that is presented to you. I will take care to send you aid if you find yourself in difficulty, but in all things you will act as may be expected of your judgment. From this place, the 16th of August, at 4 in the morning. Your friend, the Duke." Sancho was astonished, and those who stood by made believe to be so too, and turning to the majordomo he said to him, "What we have got to do first, and it must be done at once, is to put Doctor Recio in the lock-up, for if any one wants to kill me it is he, and by a slow death and the worst of all, which is hunger." "Likewise," said the carver, "it is my opinion your worship should not eat anything that is on this table, for the whole was a present from some nuns, and as they say, behind the cross there's the devil." "I don't deny it," said Sancho, "so for the present give me a piece of bread and 4 pounds or so of grapes, no poison can come in them, for the fact is I can't go on without eating, and if we are to be prepared for these battles that are threatening us, we must be well provisioned, for it is the tripes that carry the heart and not the heart the tripes. And you, secretary, answer my lord the duke and tell him that all his commands shall be obeyed to the letter, as he directs. And say from me to my lady the duchess that I kiss her hands, and that I beg of her not to forget to send my letter and bundle to my wife Teresa Panza by a messenger, and I will take it as a great favour and will not fail to serve her in all that may lie within my power. And as you are about it, you may enclose a kiss of the hand to my master Don Quixote, that he may see I am grateful bred. And as a good secretary and a good Biscayan, you may add whatever you like, and whatever will come in best. And now take away this cloth, and give me something to eat, and I'll be ready to meet all the spies and assassins and enchanters that may come against me or my island." At this instant a page entered, saying, "Here is a farmer on business, who wants to speak to your lordship on a matter of great importance, he says." "It's very odd," said Sancho, "the ways of these men on business. Is it possible they can be such fools as not to see that an hour like this is no hour for coming on business? We who govern, and we who are judges, are we not men of flesh and blood, and are we not to be allowed the time required for taking rest, unless they'd have us made of marble? By God and on my conscience, if the government remains in my hands, which I have a notion it won't, I'll bring more than one man on business to order. However, tell this good man to come in, but take care first of all that he is not some spy or one of my assassins." "No, my lord," said the page, "for he looks like a simple fellow, and either I know very little, or he is as good bred." "There is nothing to be afraid of," said the majordomo, "for we are all here." "Would it be possible, carver," said Sancho, "now that Doctor Pedro Recio is not here, to let me eat something solid and substantial, if it were even a piece of bread and an onion?" "Tonight at supper," said the carver, "the shortcomings of the dinner shall be made good, and your lordship shall be fully contented." "God grant it," said Sancho. The farmer now came in, a well-favoured man that one might see 1,000 leagues off was an honest fellow and a good soul. The first thing he said was, "Which is the lord governor here?" "Which should it be," said the secretary, "but he who is seated in the chair?" "Then I humble myself before him," said the farmer, and going on his knees he asked for his hand, to kiss it. Sancho refused it, and bade him stand up and say what he wanted. The farmer obeyed, and then said, "I am a farmer, señor, a native of Miguelturra, a village 2 leagues from Ciudad Real." "Another Tirteafuera," said Sancho. "Say on, brother, I know Miguelturra very well, I can tell you, for it's not very far from my own town." "The case is this, señor," continued the farmer, "that by God's mercy I am married with the leave and license of the Holy Roman Catholic Church. I have 2 sons, students, and the younger is studying to become bachelor, and the elder to become licentiate. I am a widower, for my wife died, or more properly speaking, a bad doctor killed her on my hands, giving her a purge when she was with child, and if it had pleased God that the child had been born, and was a boy, I would have put him to study for doctor, that he might not envy his brothers the bachelor and the licentiate." "So that if your wife had not died, or had not been killed, you would not now be a widower," said Sancho. "No, señor, certainly not," said the farmer. "We've got that much settled," said Sancho. "Get on, brother, for it's more bedtime than business time." "Well then," said the farmer, "this son of mine who is going to be a bachelor fell in love in the said town with a damsel called Clara Perlerina, daughter of Andres Perlerino, a very rich farmer; and this name of Perlerines does not come to them by ancestry or descent, but because all the family are paralytics, and for a better name they call them Perlerines; though, to tell the truth, the damsel is as fair as an oriental pearl, and like a flower of the field, if you look at her on the right side; on the left not so much, for on that side she wants an eye that she lost by smallpox; and though her face is thickly and deeply pitted, those who love her say that they are not pits that are there, but the graves where the hearts of her lovers are buried. She is so cleanly that not to soil her face she carries her nose turned up, as they say, so that one would fancy it was running away from her mouth; and with all this she looks extremely well, for she has a wide mouth, and but for wanting 10 or a dozen teeth and grinders she might compare and compete with the comeliest. Of her lips I say nothing, for they are so fine and thin that, if lips might be reeled, one might make a skein of them; but being of a different colour from ordinary lips they are wonderful, for they are mottled, blue, green, and purple. Let my lord the governor pardon me for painting so minutely the charms of her who some time or other will be my daughter, for I love her and I don't find her amiss." "Paint what you will," said Sancho, "I enjoy your painting, and if I had dined there would be no dessert more to my taste than your portrait." "That I have still to furnish," said the farmer, "but a time will come when we may be able, if we are not now; and I can tell you, señor, if I could paint her gracefulness and her tall figure, it would astonish you; but that is impossible since she is bent double with her knees up to her mouth; but for all that it is easy to see that if she could stand up she'd knock her head against the ceiling; and she would have given her hand to my bachelor ere this, only that she can't stretch it out, for it's contracted; but still one can see its elegance and fine make by its long furrowed nails." "That will do, brother," said Sancho. "Consider you have painted her from head to foot. What is it you want now? Come to the point, without all this beating about the bush, and all these scraps and additions." "I want your worship, señor," said the farmer, "to do me the favour of giving me a letter of recommendation to the girl's father, begging him to be so good as to let this marriage take place, as we are not ill matched either in the gifts of fortune or of nature; for, to tell the truth, señor governor, my son is possessed of a devil, and there is not a day but the evil spirits torment him 3 or 4 times; and from having once fallen into the fire, he has his face puckered up like a piece of parchment, and his eyes watery and always running; but he has the disposition of an angel, and if it was not for belabouring and pummelling himself he'd be a saint." "Is there anything else you want, good man?" said Sancho. "There's one other thing I'd like," said the farmer, "but I'm afraid to mention it; however, out it must, for after all I can't let it be rotting in my breast, come what may. I mean, señor, that I'd like your worship to give me 300 or 600 ducats as a help to my bachelor's portion, to help him in setting up house; for they must, in short, live by themselves, without being subject to the interferences of their fathers-in-law." "Just see if there's anything else you'd like," said Sancho, "and don't hold back from mentioning it out of bashfulness or modesty." "No, indeed there is not," said the farmer. The moment he said this the governor started to his feet, and seizing the chair he had been sitting on, exclaimed, "By all that's good, you ill-bred, boorish Don Bumpkin, if you don't get out of this at once and hide yourself from my sight, I'll lay your head open with this chair. You whoreson rascal, you devil's own painter, and is it at this hour you come to ask me for 600 ducats? How should I have them, you stinking brute? And why should I give them to you if I had them, you knave and blockhead? What have I to do with Miguelturra or the whole family of the Perlerins? Get out, I say, or by the life of my lord the duke I'll do as I said. You're not from Miguelturra, but some knave sent here from hell to tempt me. Why, you villain, I have not yet had the government half a day, and you want me to have 600 ducats already." The carver made signs to the farmer to leave the room, which he did with his head down, and to all appearance in terror lest the governor should carry his threats into effect, for the rogue knew very well how to play his part. But let us leave Sancho in his wrath, and peace be with them all, and let us return to Don Quixote, whom we left with his face bandaged and doctored after the cat wounds, of which he was not cured for 8 days; and on one of these there befell him what Cide Hamete promises to relate with that exactitude and truth with which he is wont to set forth everything connected with this great history, however minute it may be. Chapter 48 of Don Quixote, Volume 2. Chapter 48. Of what befell Don Quixote with Dona Rodriguez, the Duchess's duenna, together with other occurrences worthy of record and eternal remembrance. Exceedingly moody and dejected was the sorely wounded Don Quixote, with his face bandaged and marked, not by the hand of God, but by the claws of a cat, mishaps incidental to knight-errantry. 6 days he remained without appearing in public, and one night as he lay awake thinking of his misfortunes, and of Altisidora's pursuit of him, he perceived that some one was opening the door of his room with a key, and he at once made up his mind that the enamoured damsel was coming to make an assault upon his chastity, and put him in danger of failing in the fidelity he owed to his lady Dulcinea del Toboso. "No," said he, firmly persuaded of the truth of his idea, and he said it loud enough to be heard, "the greatest beauty upon earth shall not avail to make me renounce my adoration of her whom I bear stamped and engraved in the core of my heart and the secret depths of my bowels. Be thou, lady mine, transformed into a clumsy country wench, or into a nymph of golden Tagus weaving a web of silk and gold, let Merlin or Montesinos hold thee captive where they will. Where'er thou art mine, and where'er I am must be thine." The very instant he had uttered these words the door opened. He stood up on the bed, wrapped from head to foot in a yellow satin coverlet, with a cap on his head, and his face and his moustaches tied up, his face because of the scratches, and his moustaches to keep them from drooping and falling down, in which trim he looked the most extraordinary scarecrow that could be conceived. He kept his eyes fixed on the door, and just as he was expecting to see the love-smitten and unhappy Altisidora make her appearance, he saw coming in a most venerable duenna, in a long white-bordered veil that covered and enveloped her from head to foot. Between the fingers of her left hand she held a short lighted candle, while with her right she shaded it to keep the light from her eyes, which were covered by spectacles of great size, and she advanced with noiseless steps, treading very softly. Don Quixote kept an eye upon her from his watch-tower, and observing her costume and noting her silence, he concluded that it must be some witch or sorceress that was coming in such a guise to work him some mischief, and he began crossing himself at a great rate. The spectre still advanced, and on reaching the middle of the room, looked up and saw the energy with which Don Quixote was crossing himself, and if he was scared by seeing such a figure as hers, she was terrified at the sight of his, for the moment she saw his tall yellow form with the coverlet and the bandages that disfigured him, she gave a loud scream, and exclaiming, "Jesus, what's this I see?" let fall the candle in her fright, and then finding herself in the dark, turned about to make off, but stumbling on her skirts in her consternation, she measured her length with a mighty fall. Don Quixote in his trepidation began saying, "I conjure thee, phantom, or whatever thou art, tell me what thou art, and what thou wouldst with me. If thou art a soul in torment, say so, and all that my powers can do I will do for thee, for I am a Catholic Christian, and love to do good to all the world, and to this end I have embraced the order of knight-errantry to which I belong, the province of which extends to doing good even to souls in purgatory." The unfortunate duenna, hearing herself thus conjured, by her own fear guessed Don Quixote's, and in a low plaintive voice answered, "Señor Don Quixote, if so be you are indeed Don Quixote, I am no phantom or spectre or soul in purgatory, as you seem to think, but Doña Rodriguez, duenna of honour to my lady the Duchess, and I come to you with one of those grievances your worship is wont to redress." "Tell me, Señora Doña Rodriguez," said Don Quixote, "do you perchance come to transact any go-between business? Because I must tell you I am not available for anybody's purpose, thanks to the peerless beauty of my lady Dulcinea del Toboso. In short, Señora Doña Rodriguez, if you will leave out and put aside all love messages, you may go and light your candle and come back, and we will discuss all the commands you have for me, and whatever you wish, saving only, as I said, all seductive communications." "I carry nobody's messages, señor," said the duenna. "Little you know me. Nay, I'm not far enough advanced in years to take any such childish tricks. God be praised I have a soul in my body still, and all my teeth and grinders in my mouth, except one or two that the colds, so common in this Aragon country, have robbed me of. But wait a little while I go and light my candle, and I will return immediately and lay my sorrows before you as before one who relieves those of all the world." And without staying for an answer, she quitted the room and left Don Quixote tranquilly meditating while he waited for her. 1,000 thoughts at once suggested themselves to him on the subject of this new adventure, and it struck him as being ill done and worse advised in him to expose himself to the danger of breaking his plighted faith to his lady, and said he to himself, "Who knows but that the devil, being wily and cunning, may be trying now to entrap me with a duenna, having failed with empresses, queens, duchesses, marchionesses, and countesses? Many a time have I heard it said by many a man of sense that he will sooner offer you a flat-nosed wench than a Roman-nosed one, and who knows but this privacy, this opportunity, this silence, may awaken my sleeping desires, and lead me in these my latter years to fall where I have never tripped. In cases of this sort, it is better to flee than to await the battle. But I must be out of my senses to think and utter such nonsense, for it is impossible that a long, white-hooded, spectacled duenna could stir up or excite a wanton thought in the most graceless bosom in the world. Is there a duenna on earth that has fair flesh? Is there a duenna in the world that escapes being ill-tempered, wrinkled, and prudish? Avaunt, then, ye duenna crew, undelightful to all mankind. Oh, but that lady did well who, they say, had at the end of her reception-room a couple of figures of duennas with spectacles and lace cushions, as if at work, and those statues served quite as well to give an air of propriety to the room as if they had been real duennas." So saying, he leaped off the bed, intending to close the door and not allow Señora Rodriguez to enter. But as he went to shut it, Señora Rodriguez returned with a wax candle lighted, and having a closer view of Don Quixote, with the coverlet round him and his bandages and nightcap, she was alarmed afresh, and retreating a couple of paces, exclaimed, "Am I safe, Sir Knight? For I don't look upon it as a sign of very great virtue that your worship should have got up out of bed." "I may well ask the same, señora," said Don Quixote, "and I do ask whether I shall be safe from being assailed and forced." "Of whom and against whom do you demand that security, Sir Knight?" said the duenna. "Of you and against you I ask it," said Don Quixote, "for I am not marble, nor are you brass, nor is it now 10 o'clock in the morning, but midnight, or a trifle past it, I fancy, and we are in a room more secluded and retired than the cave could have been where the treacherous and daring Aeneas enjoyed the fair soft-hearted Dido. But give me your hand, señora. I require no better protection than my own countenance and my own sense of propriety, as well as that which is inspired by that venerable head-dress." And so saying, he kissed her right hand and took it in his own, she yielding it to him with equal ceremoniousness. And here Cide Hamete inserts a parenthesis in which he says that to have seen the pair marching from the door to the bed, linked hand in hand in this way, he would have given the best of the 2 tunics he had. Don Quixote finally got into bed, and Dona Rodriguez took her seat on a chair at some little distance from his couch, without taking off her spectacles or putting aside the candle. Don Quixote wrapped the bedclothes round him, and covered himself up completely, leaving nothing but his face visible, and as soon as they had both regained their composure, he broke silence, saying, "Now, Señor Dona Rodriguez, you may unbosom yourself, and out with everything you have in your sorrowful heart and afflicted bowels, and by me you shall be listened to with chaste ears, and aided by compassionate exertions." "I believe it," replied the duenna. "From your worship's gentle and winning presence only such a Christian answer could be expected. The fact is, then, Señor Don Quixote, that though you see me seated in this chair, here in the middle of the kingdom of Aragon, and in the attire of a despised outcast duenna, I am from the Asturias of Oviedo, and of a family with which many of the best of the province are connected by blood; but my untoward fate, and the improvidence of my parents, who, I know not how, were unseasonably reduced to poverty, brought me to the court of Madrid, where as a provision and to avoid greater misfortunes, my parents placed me as seamstress in the service of a lady of quality, and I would have you know that for hemming and sewing I have never been surpassed by any all my life. My parents left me in service, and returned to their own country, and a few years later went, no doubt, to heaven, for they were excellent good Catholic Christians. I was left an orphan with nothing but the miserable wages and trifling presents that are given to servants of my sort in palaces. But about this time, without any encouragement on my part, one of the esquires of the household fell in love with me, a man somewhat advanced in years, full bearded and personable, and above all as good a gentleman as the king himself, for he came of a mountain stock. We did not carry on our loves with such secrecy but that they came to the knowledge of my lady, and she, not to have any fuss about it, had us married with the full sanction of the Holy Mother Roman Catholic Church, of which marriage a daughter was born to put an end to my good fortune, if I had any. Not that I died in childbirth, for I passed through it safely and in due season, but because shortly afterwards my husband died of a certain shock he received, and had I time to tell you of it, I know your worship would be surprised." And here she began to weep bitterly, and said, "Pardon me, Señor Don Quixote, if I am unable to control myself, for every time I think of my unfortunate husband, my eyes fill up with tears. God bless me, with what an air of dignity he used to carry my lady behind him on a stout mule as black as jet; for in those days they did not use coaches or chairs, as they say they do now, and ladies rode behind their squires. This much at least I cannot help telling you, that you may observe the good breeding and punctiliousness of my worthy husband. As he was turning into the Calle de Santiago in Madrid, which is rather narrow, one of the alcaldes of the court, with 2 alguacils before him, was coming out of it, and as soon as my good squire saw him, he wheeled his mule about, and made as if he would turn and accompany him. My lady, who was riding behind him, said to him in a low voice, 'What are you about, you sneak? Don't you see that I am here?' The alcalde, like a polite man, pulled up his horse, and said to him, 'Proceed, señor, for it is I, rather, who ought to accompany my lady Dona Casilda,' for that was my mistress's name. Still my husband, cap in hand, persisted in trying to accompany the alcalde, and seeing this my lady, filled with rage and vexation, pulled out a big pin, or rather, I think, a bodkin, out of her needle case, and drove it into his back with such force that my husband gave a loud yell, and writhing fell to the ground with his lady. Her 2 lackeys ran to rise her up, and the alcalde and the alguacils did the same. The Guadalajara gate was all in commotion, I mean the idlers congregated there. My mistress came back on foot, and my husband hurried away to a barber's shop, protesting that he was run right through the guts. The courtesy of my husband was noised abroad to such an extent that the boys gave him no peace on the street. and on this account, and because he was somewhat short-sighted, my lady dismissed him. And it was chagrin at this, I am convinced beyond a doubt, that brought on his death. I was left a helpless widow, with a daughter on my hands growing up in beauty like the sea foam. At length, however, as I had the character of being an excellent needlewoman, my lady the Duchess, then lately married to my lord the Duke, offered to take me with her to this kingdom of Aragon, and my daughter also, and here, as time went by, my daughter grew up, and with her all the graces in the world. She sings like a lark, dances quick as thought, foots it like a gypsy, reads and writes like a schoolmaster, and does sums like a miser. Of her neatness I say nothing, for the running water is not purer, and her age is now, if my memory serves me, 16 years, 5 months, and 3 days, one more or less. To come to the point, the son of a very rich farmer, living in the village of my lord the Duke's not very far from here, fell in love with this girl of mine, and, in short, how I know not, they came together, and under the promise of marrying her, he made a fool of my daughter, and will not keep his word. And though my lord the Duke is aware of it, for I have complained to him, not once but many and many a time, and entreated him to order the farmer to marry my daughter, he turns a deaf ear, and will scarcely listen to me, the reason being that as the deceiver's father is so rich, and lends him money, and is constantly going security for his debts, he does not like to offend or annoy him in any way. Now, señor, I want your worship to take it upon yourself to redress this wrong either by entreaty or by arms. For by what all the world says, you came into it to redress grievances and right wrongs and help the unfortunate. Let your worship put before you the unprotected condition of my daughter, her youth, and all the perfections I have said she possesses. And before God and on my conscience, out of all the damsels my lady has, there is not one that comes up to the sole of her shoe, and the one they call Altisidora, and look upon as the boldest and gayest of them, put in comparison with my daughter, does not come within 2 leagues of her. For I would have you know, señor, all is not gold that glitters, and that same little Altisidora has more forwardness than good looks, and more impudence than modesty, besides being not very sound, for she has such a disagreeable breath that one cannot bear to be near her for a moment, and even my lady the Duchess, but I'll hold my tongue, for they say that walls have ears. For heaven's sake, Doña Rodriguez, what ails my lady the Duchess? Asked Don Quixote. Adjured in that way, replied the duenna, I cannot help answering the question and telling the whole truth. Señor Don Quixote, have you observed the comeliness of my lady the Duchess, that smooth complexion of hers like a burnished polished sword, those 2 cheeks of milk and carmine, that gay lively step with which she treads, or rather seems to spurn the earth, so that one would fancy she went radiating health wherever she passed? Well then, let me tell you, she may thank first of all God for this, and next 2 issues that she has, one in each leg, by which all the evil humours, of which the doctors say she is full, are discharged. Blessed Virgin! Exclaimed Don Quixote, and is it possible that my lady the Duchess has drains of that sort? I would not have believed it if the barefoot friars had told it me, but as the lady Doña Rodriguez says so, it must be so. But surely such issues, and in such places, do not discharge humours, but liquid amber. Verily, I do believe now that this practice of opening issues is a very important matter for the health. Don Quixote had hardly said this, when the chamber door flew open with a loud bang, and with the start the noise gave her, Doña Rodriguez let the candle fall from her hand, and the room was left as dark as a wolf's mouth, as the saying is. Suddenly the poor duenna felt 2 hands seize her by the throat, so tightly that she could not croak, while some one else, without uttering a word, very briskly hoisted up her petticoats, and with what seemed to be a slipper began to lay on so heartily that any one would have felt pity for her. But although Don Quixote felt it, he never stirred from his bed, but lay quiet and silent, nay, apprehensive that his turn for a drubbing might be coming. Nor was the apprehension an idle one, For leaving the duenna, who did not dare to cry out, well basted, the silent executioners fell upon Don Quixote, and stripping him of the sheet and the coverlet, they pinched him so fast and so hard that he was driven to defend himself with his fists, and all this in marvellous silence. The battle lasted nearly half an hour, and then the phantoms fled. Dona Rodriguez gathered up her skirts, and bemoaning her fate went out without saying a word to Don Quixote, and he, sorely pinched, puzzled, and dejected, remained alone, and there we will leave him, wondering who could have been the perverse enchanter who had reduced him to such a state. But that shall be told in due season, for Sancho claims our attention, and the methodical arrangement of the story demands it. End of Chapter 48. Chapter 49 of Don Quixote, Volume 2. Chapter 49. Of what happened Sancho in making the round of his island. We left the great governor angered and irritated by that portrait-painting rogue of a farmer who, instructed the major domo, as the major domo was by the duke, tried to practice upon him. He, however, fool, boor, and clown as he was, held his own against them all, saying to those around him and to Doctor Pedro Recio, who as soon as the private business of the duke's letter was disposed of had returned to the room, "Now I see plainly enough that judges and governors ought to be, and must be made of brass not to feel the importunities of the applicants that at all times and all seasons insist on being heard, and having their business dispatched, and their own affairs and no others attended to, come what may; and if the poor judge does not hear them and settle the matter, either because he cannot, or because that is not the time set apart for hearing them, forthwith they abuse him, and run him down, and gnaw at his bones, and even pick holes in his pedigree. You silly, stupid applicant, don't be in a hurry. Wait for the proper time and season for doing business. Don't come at dinner hour or at bedtime, for judges are only flesh and blood, and must give to nature what she naturally demands of them, all except myself, for in my case I give her nothing to eat, thanks to Señor Doctor Pedro Recio Tirteafuera here, who would have me die of hunger, and declares that death to be life, and the same sort of life may God give him and all his kind, I mean the bad doctors, for the good ones deserve palms and laurels." All who knew Sancho Panza were astonished to hear him speak so elegantly, and did not know what to attribute it to, unless it were that office and grave responsibility either smarten or stupefy men's wits. At last Doctor Pedro Recio Aguilers of Tirteafuera promised to let him have supper that night, though it might be in a contravention of all the aphorisms of Hippocrates. With this the governor was satisfied, and looked forward to the approach of night and supper time with great anxiety, and though time, to his mind, stood still and made no progress, nevertheless the hour he so longed for came, and they gave him a beef salad with onions and some boiled calves' feet rather far gone. At this he fell to with greater relish than if they had given him francolins from Milan, pheasants from Rome, veal from Sorrento, partridges from Moran, or geese from Lavajos, and turning to the doctor at supper he said to him, "Look here, Señor Doctor, for the future don't trouble yourself about giving me dainty things or choice dishes to eat, for it will be only taking my stomach off its hinges. It is accustomed to goat, cow, bacon, hung beef, turnips, and onions, and if by any chance it is given these palace dishes, it receives them squeamishly, and sometimes with loathing. What the head carver had best do is to serve me with what they call ollas podridas, and the rottener they are the better they smell, and he can put whatever he likes into them, so long as it is good to eat, and I'll be obliged to him, and will requite him some day. But let nobody play pranks on me, for either we are or we are not. Let us live and eat in peace and good fellowship, for when God sends the dawn, he sends it for all. I mean to govern this island without giving up a right or taking a bribe. Let every one keep his eye open, and look out for the arrow, for I can tell him, the devil's in Cantillana, and if they drive me to it they'll see something that will astonish them. Nay, make yourself honey, and the flies eat you." "Of a truth, Señor Governor," said the carver, "your worship is in the right of it in everything you have said, and I promise you in the name of all the inhabitants of this island that they will serve your worship with all zeal, affection, and good will, for the mild kind of government you have given a sample of to begin with leaves them no ground for doing or thinking anything to your worship's disadvantage." "That I believe," said Sancho, "and they would be great fools if they did, or thought otherwise. Once more I say, see to my feeding and my dapples, for that is the great point, and what is most to the purpose. And when the hour comes let us go the rounds, for it is my intention to purge this island of all manner of uncleanness, and of all idle, good-for-nothing vagabonds. For I would have you know that lazy idlers are the same thing in a state as the drones in a hive, that eat up the honey the industrious bees make. I mean to protect the husbandman, to preserve to the gentleman his privileges, to reward the virtuous, and above all to respect religion and honour its ministers. What say you to that, my friends? Is there anything in what I say, or am I talking to no purpose?" "There is so much in what your worship says, señor governor," said the majordomo, "that I am filled with wonder when I see a man like your worship, entirely without learning, for I believe you have none at all, say such things, and so full of sound maxims and sage remarks, very different from what was expected of your worship's intelligence by those who sent us or by us who came here. Every day we see something new in this world, jokes become realities, and the jokers find the tables turned upon them." Night came, and with the permission of Doctor Pedro Recio, the governor had supper. They then got ready to go the rounds, and he started with the majordomo, the secretary, the head carver, the chronicler charged with recording his deeds, and alguacils and notaries enough to form a fair-sized squadron. In the midst marched Sancho with his staff, as fine a sight as one could wish to see, and but a few streets of the town had been traversed when they heard a noise as of a clashing of swords. They hastened to the spot, and found that the combatants were but two, who seeing the authorities approaching stood still, and one of them exclaimed, "Help, in the name of God and the king! Are men to be allowed to rob in the middle of this town, and rush out and attack people in the very streets?" "Be calm, my good man," said Sancho, "and tell me what the cause of this quarrel is, for I am the governor." Said the other combatant, "Señor governor, I will tell you in a very few words. Your worship must know that this gentleman has just now won more than 1,000 reals in that gambling house opposite, and God knows how. I was there, and gave more than one doubtful point in his favour, very much against what my conscience told me. He made off with his winnings, and when I made sure that he was going to give me a crown or so, at least by way of a present, as it is usual and customary to give men of quality of any sort who stand by to see fair or foul play, and back up swindles, and prevent quarrels, he pocketed his money and left the house. Indignant at this, I followed him, and speaking him fairly and civilly asked him to give me if it were only 8 reals, for he knows I am an honest man, and that I have neither profession nor property, for my parents never brought me up to any or left me any. But the rogue, who is a greater thief than Cacus, and a greater sharper than Andradilla, would not give me more than 4 reals, so your worship may see how little shame and conscience he has. But by my faith, if you had not come up I'd have made him disgorge his winnings, and he'd have learned what the range of the steelyard was." "What do you say to this?" asked Sancho. The other replied that all his antagonist said was true, and that he did not choose to give him more than 4 reals, because he very often gave him money, and that those who expected presents ought to be civil and take what is given to them with a cheerful countenance, and not make any claim against winners unless they know them for certain to be sharpers and their winnings to be unfairly won, and that there could be no better proof that he himself was an honest man than his having refused to give anything, for sharpers always pay tribute to lookers-on who know them. "That is true," said the majordomo. "Let your worship consider what is to be done with these men." "What is to be done," said Sancho, "is this. You, the winner, be you good, bad, or indifferent, give this assailant of yours 100 reals at once, and you must disperse 30 more to the poor prisoners, and you who have neither profession nor property, and hang about the island in idleness, take these 100 reals now, and some time of the day tomorrow quit the island under sentence of banishment for 10 years, and under pain of completing it in another life if you violate the sentence, for I'll hang you in a gibbet, or at least the hangman will by my orders. Not a word from either of you, or I'll make him feel my hand." The one paid down the money and the other took it, and the latter quitted the island, while the other went home, and then the governor said, "Either I am not good for much, or I'll get rid of these gambling houses, for it strikes me they are very mischievous." "This one at least," said one of the notaries, "your worship will not be able to get rid of, for a great man owns it, and what he loses every year is beyond all comparison more than what he makes by the cards. On the minor gambling houses your worship may exercise your power, and it is they that do most harm and shelter the most barefaced practices. For in the houses of lords and gentlemen of quality, the notorious sharpers dare not attempt to play their tricks, and as the vice of gambling has become common, it is better that men should play in houses of repute than in some tradesmen's, where they catch an unlucky fellow in the small hours of the morning and skin him alive." "I know already, notary, that there is a good deal to be said on that point," said Sancho. And now a tipstaff came along with a young man in its grasp, and said, "Señor Governor, this youth was coming towards us, and as soon as he saw the officers of justice, he turned about and ran like a deer, a sure proof he must be some evildoer. I ran after him, and had it not been that he stumbled and fell, I should never have caught him." "What did you run for, fellow?" said Sancho. To which the young man replied, "Señor, it was to avoid answering all the questions officers of justice put." "What are you by trade?" "A weaver." "And what do you weave?" "Lance heads, with your worship's good leave." "You're facetious with me. You plume yourself on being a wag? Very good. And where were you going just now?" "To take the air, señor." "And where does one take the air on this island?" "Where it blows." "Good, your answers are very much to the point. You are a smart youth. But take notice that I am the air, and that I blow upon you astern, and send you to jail. Ho there, lay hold of him and take him off. I'll make him sleep there tonight without air." "By God," said the young man, "your worship will make me sleep in jail just as soon as make me king." "Why shan't I make thee sleep in jail?" said Sancho. "Have I not the power to arrest thee and release thee whenever I like?" "All the power your worship has," said the young man, "won't be able to make me sleep in jail." "How? Not able?" said Sancho. "Take him away at once where he'll see his mistake with his own eyes, even if the jailer is willing to exert his interested generosity on his behalf; for I'll lay a penalty of 2,000 ducats on him if he allows him to stir a step from the prison." "That's ridiculous," said the young man. "The fact is, all the men on earth will not make me sleep in prison." "Tell me, you devil," said Sancho, "have you got any angel that will deliver you, and take off the irons I am going to order them to put upon you?" "Now, señor governor," said the young man in a sprightly manner, "let us be reasonable and come to the point. Granted, your worship may order me to be taken to prison, and to have irons and chains put on me, and to be shut up in a cell, and may lay heavy penalties on the jailer if he lets me out, and that he obeys your orders. Still, if I don't choose to sleep, and choose to remain awake all night without closing an eye, will your worship with all your power be able to make me sleep if I don't choose?" "No, truly," said the secretary, "and the fellow has made his point." "So then," said Sancho, "it would be entirely of your own choice you would keep from sleeping, not in opposition to my will?" "No, señor," said the youth, "certainly not." "Well then, go, and God be with you," said Sancho. "Be off home to sleep, and God give you sound sleep, for I don't want to rob you of it. But for the future, let me advise you don't joke with the authorities, because you may come across someone who will bring down the joke on your own skull." The young man went his way, and the governor continued his round, and shortly afterwards 2 tipstaffs came up with a man in custody and said, "Señor governor, this person, who seems to be a man, is not so, but a woman, and not an ill-favoured one, in man's clothes." They raised 2 or 3 lanterns to her face, and by their light they distinguished the features of a woman to all appearance of the age of 16 or a little more, with her hair gathered into a gold and green silk net, and fair as 1,000 pearls. They scanned her from head to foot, and observed that she had on red silk stockings with garters of white taffety, bordered with gold and pearl. Her breeches were of green and gold stuff, and under an open jacket or jerkin of the same she wore a doublet of the finest white and gold cloth. Her shoes were white, and such as men wear. She carried no sword at her belt, but only a richly ornamented dagger, and on her finger she had several handsome rings. In short, the girl seemed fair to look at in the eyes of all, and none of those who beheld her knew her. The people of the town said they could not imagine who she was, and those who were in the secret of the jokes that were to be practised upon Sancho were the ones who were the most surprised, for this incident or discovery had not been arranged by them, and they watched anxiously to see how the affair would end. Sancho was fascinated by the girl's beauty, and he asked her who she was, where she was going, and what had induced her to dress herself in that garb. She, with her eyes fixed on the ground, answered in modest confusion, "I cannot tell you, señor, before so many people, what it is of such consequence to me to have kept secret. One thing I wish to be known, that I am no thief or evildoer, only an unhappy maiden whom the power of jealousy has led to break through the respect that is due to modesty." Hearing this, the majordomo said to Sancho, "Make the people stand back, señor governor, that this lady may say what she wishes with less embarrassment." Sancho gave the order, and all except the majordomo, the head carver, and the secretary fell back. Finding herself in the presence of no more, the damsel went on to say, "I am the daughter, sirs, of Pedro Perez Mazorca, the wool farmer of this town, who is in the habit of coming very often to my father's house." "That won't do, señora," said the majordomo, "for I know Pedro Perez very well, and I know he has no child at all, neither son or daughter; and besides, though you say he is your father, you add then that he comes very often to your father's house." "I already noticed that," said Sancho. "I am confused just now, sirs," said the damsel, "and I don't know what I am saying; but the truth is that I am the daughter of Diego de la Llana, whom you must all know." "Ay, that will do," said the majordomo, "for I know Diego de la Llana, and I know he is a gentleman of position and a rich man, and that he has a son and a daughter, and that since he was left a widower, nobody in all this town can speak of having seen his daughter's face, for he keeps her so closely shut up that he does not give even the son a chance of seeing her, and for all that report says she is extremely beautiful." "It is true," said the damsel, "and I am that daughter; whether report lies or not as to my beauty, you, sirs, will have decided by this time, as you have seen me." And with this she began to weep bitterly. On seeing this, the secretary leant over to the head carver's ear, and said to him in a low voice, "Something serious has no doubt happened to this poor maiden, that she goes wandering from home in such a dress, and at such an hour, and one of her rank too." "There can be no doubt about it," returned the carver, "and moreover her tears confirm your suspicion." Sancho gave her the best comfort he could, and entreated her to tell them without any fear what had happened to her, as they would all earnestly and by every means in their power endeavour to relieve her. "The fact is, sirs," said she, "that my father has kept me shut up these 10 years, for so long as it is since the earth received my mother. Mass is said at home in a sumptuous chapel, and all this time I have seen but the sun in the heaven by day, and the moon and the stars by night, nor do I know what streets are like, or plazas, or churches, or even men, except my father and a brother I have, and Pedro Perez the wool farmer, whom, because he came frequently to our house, I took it into my head to call my father, to avoid naming my own. This seclusion, and the restrictions laid upon my going out, were it only to church, have been keeping me unhappy for many a day and month past. I longed to see the world, or at least the town where I was born, and it did not seem to me that this wish was inconsistent with the respect maidens of good quality should have for themselves. When I heard them talking of bullfights taking place, and of javelin games, and of acting plays, I asked my brother, who is younger than myself, to tell me what sort of things these were, and many more that I had never seen. He explained them to me as well as he could, but the only effect was to kindle in me a still stronger desire to see them. At last, to cut short the story of my ruin, I begged and entreated my brother, oh that I had never made such an entreaty, and once more she gave way to a burst of weeping. "Proceed, señora," said the majordomo, "and finish your story of what has happened to you, for your words and tears are keeping us all in suspense." "I have but little more to say, though many a tear to shed," said the damsel, "for ill-placed desires can only be paid for in some such way." The maiden's beauty had made a deep impression on the head carver's heart, and he again raised his lantern for another look at her, and thought they were not tears she was shedding, but seed-pearl or dew of the meadow; nay, he exalted them still higher, and made oriental pearls of them, and fervently hoped her misfortune might not be so great a one as her tears and sobs seemed to indicate. The governor was losing patience at the length of time the girl was taking to tell her story, and told her not to keep them waiting any longer, for it was late, and there still remained a good deal of the town to be gone over. She, with broken sobs and half-suppressed sighs, went on to say, "My misfortune, my misadventure, is simply this. that I entreated my brother to dress me up as a man in a suit of his clothes, and take me some night, when our father was asleep, to see the whole town. He, overcome by my entreaties, consented, and dressing me in this suit, and himself in clothes of mine that fitted him as if made for him, for he has not a hair on his chin, and might pass for a very beautiful young girl, to-night, about an hour ago, more or less, we left the house, and guided by our youthful and foolish impulse, we made a circuit of the whole town, and then, as we were about to return home, we saw a great troop of people coming, and my brother said to me, "Sister, this must be the round, stir your feet and put wings to them, and follow me as fast as you can, lest they recognize us, for that would be a bad business for us." And so saying, he turned about and began, I cannot say to run, but to fly. In less than 6 paces I fell from fright, and then the officer of justice came up and carried me before your worships, where I find myself put to shame before all these people as whimsical and vicious. "So then, señora," said Sancho, "no other mishap has befallen you, nor was it jealousy that made you leave home, as you said at the beginning of your story?" "Nothing has happened to me," said she, "nor was it jealousy that brought me out, but merely a longing to see the world, which did not go beyond seeing the streets of this town." The appearance of the tipstaffs with her brother in custody, whom one of them had overtaken as he ran away from his sister, now fully confirmed the truth of what the damsel said. He had nothing on but a rich petticoat and a short blue damask cloak with fine gold lace, and his head was uncovered and adorned only with its own hair, which looked like rings of gold, so bright and curly was it. The governor, the majordomo, and the carver went aside with him, and, unheard by his sister, asked him how he came to be in that dress, and he with no less shame and embarrassment told exactly the same story as his sister, to the great delight of the enamoured carver. The governor, however, said to them, "In truth, young lady and gentlemen, this has been a very childish affair, and to explain your folly and rashness there was no necessity for all this delay and all these tears and sighs. For if you had said we are so and so, and we escaped from our father's house in this way in order to ramble about, out of mere curiosity and with no other object, there would have been an end of the matter, and none of these little sobs and tears and all the rest of it." "That is true," said the damsel, "but you see the confusion I was in was so great that it did not let me behave as I ought." "No harm has been done," said Sancho. "Come, we will leave you at your father's house; perhaps they will not have missed you; and another time don't be so childish or eager to see the world, for a respectable damsel should have a broken leg and keep at home, and the woman and the hen by gadding about are soon lost, and she who is eager to see is also eager to be seen. I say no more." The youth thanked the governor for his kind offer to take them home, and they directed their steps toward the house, which was not far off. On reaching it, the youth threw a pebble up at a grating, and immediately a woman servant who was waiting for them came down and opened the door to them, and they went in, leaving the party marvelling as much at their grace and beauty as at the fancy they had for seeing the world by night, and without quitting the village; which, however, they had set down to their youth. The head carver was left with a heart pierced through and through, and he made up his mind on the spot to demand the damsel in marriage of her father on the morrow, making sure she would not be refused him as he was a servant of the duke's; and even to Sancho ideas and schemes of marrying the youth to his daughter Sanchica suggested themselves, and he resolved to open the negotiation at the proper season, persuading himself that no husband could be refused to a governor's daughter. And so the night's round came to an end, and a couple of days later the government, whereby all his plans were overthrown and swept away, as will be seen farther on. End of chapter 49. Chapters 50 and 51 of Don Quixote Volume 2. Chapter 50. Wherein is set forth who the enchanters and executioners were who flogged the duenna and pinched Don Quixote, and also what befell the page who carried the letter to Teresa Panza, Sancho Panza's wife. Cide Hamete, the painstaking investigator of the minute points of this veracious history, says that when Dona Rodriguez left her own room to go to Don Quixote's, another duenna who slept with her observed her, and as all duennas are fond of prying, listening, and sniffing, she followed her so silently that the good Rodriguez never perceived it; and as soon as the duenna saw her enter Don Quixote's room, not to fail in a duenna's invariable practice of tattling, She hurried off that instant to report to the duchess how Dona Rodriguez was closeted with Don Quixote. The duchess told the duke, and asked him to let her and Altisidora go and see what the said duenna wanted with Don Quixote. The duke gave them leave, and the pair cautiously and quietly crept to the door of the room, and posted themselves so close to it that they could hear all that was said inside. But when the duchess heard how the Rodriguez had made public the Aranjuez of her issues, she could not restrain herself, nor Altisidora either, and so, filled with rage and thirsting for vengeance, they burst into the room and tormented Don Quixote, and flogged the duenna in the manner already described, for indignities offered to their charms and self-esteem mightily provoke the anger of women, and make them eager for revenge. The duchess told the duke what had happened, and he was much amused by it, and she, in pursuance of her design of making merry and diverting herself with Don Quixote, dispatched the page who had played the part of Dulcinea in the negotiations for her disenchantment, which Sancho Panza in the cares of government had forgotten all about, to Teresa Panza his wife, with her husband's letter and another from herself, and also a great string of fine coral beads as a present. Now the history says this page was very sharp and quick-witted, and eager to serve his lord and lady, he set off very willingly for Sancho's village. Before he entered it he observed a number of women washing in a brook, and asked them if they could tell him whether there lived there a woman of the name of Teresa Panza, wife of one Sancho Panza, squire to a knight called Don Quixote of La Mancha. At the question a young girl who was washing stood up and said, "Teresa Panza is my mother, and that Sancho is my father, and that knight is our master." "Well then, miss," said the page, "come and show me where your mother is, for I bring her a letter and a present from your father." "That I will do with all my heart, señor," said the girl, who seemed to be about 14 more or less, and leaving the clothes she was washing to one of her companions, and without putting anything on her head or feet, for she was bare-legged and had her hair hanging about her, away she skipped in front of the page's horse, saying, "Come, your worship, our house is at the entrance of the town, and my mother is there, sorrowful enough at not having had any news of my father this ever so long." "Well," said the page, "I am bringing her such good news that she will have reason to thank God." And then, skipping, running, and capering, the girl reached the town, but before going into the house she called out at the door, "Come out, Mother Teresa, come out, come out! Here's a gentleman with letters and other things from my good father." At these words her Mother Teresa Panza came out, spinning a bundle of flax, in a grey petticoat, so short was it one could have fancied they to her shame had cut it short, a grey bodice of the same stuff, and a smock. She was not very old, though plainly past 40, strong, healthy, vigorous, and sun-dried; and seeing her daughter and the page on horseback, she exclaimed, "What's this, child? What gentleman is this?" "A servant of my lady, Dona Teresa Panza," replied the page, and suiting the action to the word he flung himself off his horse, and with great humility advanced to kneel before the Lady Teresa, saying, "Let me kiss your hand, Señora Dona Teresa, as the lawful and only wife of Señor Don Sancho Panza, rightful governor of the island of Barataria." "Ah, señor, get up, do that," said Teresa, "for I'm not a bit of a court lady, but only a poor countrywoman, the daughter of a clod crusher, and the wife of a squire errant, and not of any governor at all." "You are," said the page, "the most worthy wife of a most arch-worthy governor, and as proof of what I say accept this letter and this present," and at the same time he took out of his pocket a string of coral beads with gold clasps, and placed it on her neck, and said, "This letter is from his lordship the governor, and the other as well as these coral beads from my lady the duchess, who sends me to your worship." Teresa stood lost in astonishment, and her daughter just as much, and the girl said, "May I die but our master Don Quixote's at the bottom of this. He must have given father the government or county he so often promised him." "That is the truth," said the page, "for it is through Señor Don Quixote that Señor Sancho is now governor of the island of Barataria, as will be seen by this letter." "Will your worship read it to me, noble sir?" said Teresa. "For though I can spin, I can't read, not a scrap." "Nor I either," said Sanchica. "But wait a bit and I'll fetch some one who can read it, either the curate himself or the bachelor Samson Carrasco, and they'll come gladly to hear any news of my father." "There is no need to fetch anybody," said the page, "for though I can't spin, I can read, and I'll read it." And so he read it through, but as it has already been given, it is not inserted here, and then he took out the other one from the duchess, which ran as follows: "Friend Teresa, your husband Sancho's good qualities, of heart as well as of head, induced and compelled me to request my husband the duke to give him the government of one of his many islands. I am told he governs like a gerfalcon, of which I am very glad, and my lord the duke, of course, also, and I am very thankful to heaven that I have not made a mistake in choosing him for that same government, for I would have Señora Teresa know that a good governor is hard to find in this world, and may God make me as good as Sancho's way of governing. Herewith I send you, my dear, a string of coral beads with gold clasps. I wish they were oriental pearls, but 'he who gives thee a bone does not wish to see thee dead.' A time will come when we shall become acquainted and meet one another, but God knows the future. Commend me to your daughter Sanchica, and tell her from me to hold herself in readiness, for I mean to make a high match for her when she least expects it. They tell me there are big acorns in your village. Send me a couple of dozen or so, and I shall value them greatly as coming from your hand, and write to me at length to assure me of your health and well-being, and if there be anything you stand in need of, it is but to open your mouth, and that shall be the measure, and so God keep you. From this place, your loving friend, the Duchess." "Ah, what a good, plain, lowly lady," said Teresa when she heard the letter, "that I may be buried with ladies of that sort, and not the gentlewomen we have in this town, that fancy because they are gentlewomen the wind must not touch them, and go to church with as much airs as if they were queens, no less, and seem to think they are disgraced if they look at a farmer's wife. And see here how this good lady, for all she's a duchess, calls me friend, and treats me as if I was her equal, and equal may I see her with the tallest church tower in La Mancha. And as for the acorns, señor, I'll send her ladyship a peck, and such big ones that one might come to see them as a show and a wonder. And now, Sanchica, see that the gentleman is comfortable. Put up his horse and get some eggs out of the stable, and cut plenty of bacon, and let's give him his dinner like a prince, for the good news he has brought, and his own bonny face deserve it all. And meanwhile I'll run out and give the neighbours the news of our good luck, and Father Curate, and Master Nicholas the barber, who are and always have been such friends of thy father's." "That I will, mother," said Sanchica, "but mind, you must give me half of that string, for I don't think my lady the Duchess could have been so stupid as to send it all to you." "It is all for thee, my child," said Teresa, "but let me wear it round my neck for a few days, for verily it seems to make my heart glad." "You will be glad too," said the page, "when you see the bundle there is in this portmanteau, for it is a suit of the finest cloth, that the governor only wore one day out hunting and now sends, all for Señora Sanchica." "May he live 1,000 years," said Sanchica, "and the bearer as many, nay, 2,000 if needful." With this Teresa hurried out of the house with the letters, and with the string of beads round her neck, and went along thrumming the letters as if they were a tambourine, and by chance coming across the curate and Samson Carrasco, she began capering and saying, "None of us poor now, faith. We've got a little government. Ay, let the finest fine lady tackle me, and I'll give her a setting down." "What's all this, Teresa Panza?" said they. "What madness is this, and what papers are those?" "The madness is only this," said she, "that these are the letters of duchesses and governors, and these I have on my neck are fine coral beads, with Ave Marias and Paternosters of beaten gold, and I am a governess." "God help us," said the curate, "we don't understand you, Teresa, or know what you are talking about." "There, you may see it yourselves," said Teresa, and she handed him the letters. The curate read them out for Samson Carrasco to hear, and Samson and he regarded one another with looks of astonishment at what they had read, and the bachelor asked who had brought the letters. Teresa in reply bade them come with her to her house, and they would see the messenger, a most elegant youth, who had brought another present which was worth as much more. The curate took the coral beads from her neck and examined them again and again, and having satisfied himself as to their fineness, he fell to wondering afresh, and said, "By the gown I wear, I don't know what to say or think of these letters and presents. On the one hand I can see and feel the fineness of these coral beads, and on the other I read how a duchess sends to beg for a couple of dozen of acorns." "Square that if you can," said Carrasco. "Well, let's go and see this messenger, and from him we'll learn something about this mystery that has turned up." They did so, and Teresa returned with them. They found the page sifting a little barley for his horse, and Sanchica cutting a rasher of bacon to be paved with eggs for his dinner. His looks and his handsome apparel pleased them both greatly, and after they had saluted him courteously, and he them, Samson begged him to give them his news, as well of Don Quixote as of Sancho Panza, for, he said, though they had read the letters from Sancho and her ladyship the duchess, they were still puzzled and could not make out what was meant by Sancho's government, and above all of an island, when all or most of those in the Mediterranean belonged to his majesty. To this the page replied, "As to Señor Sancho Panza's being a governor, there is no doubt whatever, but whether it is an island or not that he governs, with that I have nothing to do. Suffice it that it is a town of more than 1,000 inhabitants. With regard to the acorns, I may tell you my lady the duchess is so unpretending and unassuming that, not to speak of sending to beg for acorns from a peasant woman, she has been known to send to ask for the loan of a comb from one of her neighbours; for I would have your worships know that the ladies of Aragon, though they are just as illustrious, are not so punctilious and haughty as the Castilian ladies; they treat people with greater familiarity." In the middle of this conversation Sanchica came in with her skirt full of eggs, and she said to the page, "Tell me, señor, does my father wear trunk hose since he has been governor?" "I have not noticed," said the page, "but he no doubt wears them." "Ah, my God!" said Sanchica, "what a sight it must be to have my father in tights! Isn't it odd that ever since I was born I have had a longing to see my father in trunk hose?" "As things go you will see that if you live," said the page. "By God, he is in the way to take the road with the sunshade if the government only lasts him 2 months more." The curate and the bachelor could see plainly enough that the page spoke in a waggish vein; but the fineness of the coral beads, and the hunting suit that Sanchico sent, for Teresa had already shown it to them, did away with the impression, and they could not help laughing at Sanchica's wish, and still more when Teresa said, "Señor curate, look about if there's anybody here going to Madrid or Toledo to buy me a hooped petticoat, a proper fashionable one of the best quality; for indeed and indeed I must do honour to my husband's government as well as I can. Nay, if I am put to it and have to, I'll go to court and set a coach like all the world; for she who has a governor for her husband may very well have one and keep one." "And why not, mother?" said Sanchica. "Would to God it were today instead of tomorrow, even though they were to say when they saw me seated in the coach with my mother, 'See that rubbish, that garlic-stuffed fellow's daughter, how she goes stretched at her ease in a coach as if she was a sheep-hope.' But let them tramp through the mud, and let me go in my coach with my feet off the ground. Bad luck to backbiters all over the world. Let me go warm, and the people may laugh. Do I say right, mother?" "To be sure you do, my child," said Teresa, "and all this good luck, and even more, my good Sancho foretold me; and thou wilt see, my daughter, he won't stop till he has made me a countess; for to make a beginning is everything in luck, and as I have heard thy good father say many a time, for besides being thy father he's the father of proverbs too, when they offer thee a heifer, run with a halter; when they offer thee a government, take it; when they would give thee a county, seize it; when they say hear, hear to thee with something good, swallow it. Oh no, go to sleep, and don't answer the strokes of good fortune and the lucky chances that are knocking at the door of your house." "And what do I care," added Sanchica, "whether anybody says when he sees me holding my head up, 'The dog saw himself in hempen breeches,' and the rest of it?" Hearing this the curate said, I do believe that all this family of the Panzas are born with a sackful of proverbs in their insides, every one of them. I never saw one of them that does not pour them out at all times and on all occasions." "That is true," said the page, "for Señor Governor Sancho utters them at every turn, and though a great many of them are not to the purpose, still they amuse one, and my lady the Duchess and the Duke praise them highly." "Then you still maintain that all this about Sancho's government is true, señor," said the bachelor, "and that there actually is a duchess who sends him presents and writes to him? Because we, although we have handled the present and read the letters, don't believe it, and suspect it to be something in the line of our fellow townsman Don Quixote, who fancies that everything is done by enchantment. And for this reason I am almost ready to say that I'd like to touch and feel your worship, to see whether you are a mere ambassador of the imagination, or a man of flesh and blood." "All I know, sirs," replied the page, "is that I am a real ambassador, and that Señor Sancho Panza is governor as a matter of fact, and that my lord and lady the Duke and Duchess can give, and have given him this same government, and that I have heard the said Sancho Panza bears himself very stoutly therein. Whether there be any enchantment in all this or not, it is for your worships to settle between you; for that's all I know by the oath I swear, and that is by the life of my parents whom I have still alive and love dearly." "It may be so," said the bachelor, "but dubitat Augustinus." "Doubt who will," said the page. "What I have told you is the truth, and that will always rise above falsehood as oil above water, if not operibus credite et non verbis. Let one of you come with me, and he will see with his eyes what he does not believe with his ears." "It's for me to make that trip," said Sanchica. "Take me with you, señor, behind you on your horse, for I'll go with all my heart to see my father." "Governors' daughters," said the page, "must not travel along the roads alone, but accompanied by coaches and litters and a great number of attendants." "By God," said Sanchica, "I can go as well mounted on a she-ass as in a coach. What a dainty lass you must take me for!" "Hush, girl," said Teresa, "you don't know what you're talking about. The gentleman is quite right, for, as the time so the behaviour. When it was Sancho, it was Sancha; when it is governor, it's señora. I don't know if I'm right." "Señora Teresa says more than she is aware of," said the page, "and now give me something to eat and let me go at once, for I mean to return this evening." "Come and do penance with me," said the curate at this, "for Señora Teresa has more will than means to serve so worthy a guest." The page refused, but had to consent at last for his own sake, and the curate took him home with him very gladly, in order to have an opportunity of questioning him at leisure about Don Quixote and his doings. The bachelor offered to write the letters in reply for Teresa, but she did not care to let him mix himself up in her affairs, for she thought him somewhat given to joking; and so she gave a cake and a couple of eggs to a young acolyte, who was a penman, and he wrote for her 2 letters, one for her husband and the other for the Duchess, dictated out of her own head, which are not the worst inserted in this great history, as will be seen farther on. Chapter 51. Of the progress of Sancho's government, and other such entertaining matters. Day came after the night of the governor's round, a night in which the head carver passed without sleeping, so were his thoughts of the face and air and beauty of the disguised damsel, while the major domo spent what was left of it in writing an account to his lord and lady of all Sancho said and did, being as much amazed at his sayings as at his doings, for there was a mixture of shrewdness and simplicity in all his words and deeds. The señor governor got up, and by Doctor Pedro Recio's directions, they made him break his fast on a little conserve and 4 sups of cold water, which Sancho would have readily exchanged for a piece of bread and a bunch of grapes; but seeing there was no help for it, he submitted with no little sorrow of heart and discomfort of stomach, Pedro Recio having persuaded him that light and delicate diet enlivened the wits, and that was what was most essential for persons placed in command and in responsible situations, where they have to employ not only the bodily powers but those of the mind also. By means of this sophistry Sancho was made to endure hunger, and hunger so keen that in his heart he cursed the government, and even him who had given it to him, However, with his hunger and his conserve he undertook to deliver judgments that day, and the first thing that came before him was a question that was submitted to him by a stranger, in the presence of the majordomo and the other attendants, and it was in these words: "Señor, a large river separated two districts of one and the same lordship. Will your worship please to pay attention, for the case is an important and a rather knotty one? Well then, on this river there was a bridge, and at one end of it a gallows, and a sort of tribunal, where 4 judges commonly sat to administer the law which the lord of river, bridge, and the lordship had enacted, and which was to this effect: if any one crosses by this bridge from one side to the other, he shall declare an oath where he is going to, and with what object, and if he swears truly, he shall be allowed to pass, but if falsely, he shall be put to death for it by hanging on the gallows erected there, without any remission." Though the law and its severe penalty were known, many persons crossed, but in their declarations it was easy to see at once they were telling the truth, and the judges let them pass free. It happened, however, that one man, when they came to take his declaration, swore and said that by the oath he took he was going to die upon that gallows that stood there, and nothing else. The judges held a consultation over the oath, and they said, "If we let this man pass free he has sworn falsely, and by the law he ought to die, but if we hang him, as he swore he was going to die on that gallows, and therefore swore the truth, by the same law he ought to go free. It is asked of your worship, Señor Governor, what are the judges to do with this man? For they are still in doubt and perplexity, and having heard of your worship's acute and exalted intellect, they have sent me to entreat your worship on their behalf to give your opinion on this very intricate and puzzling case." To this Sancho made answer, "Indeed those gentlemen the judges that send you to me might have spared themselves the trouble, for I have more of the obtuse than the acute in me, but repeat the case over again, so that I may understand it, and then perhaps I may be able to hit the point." The querist repeated again and again what he had said before, and then Sancho said, "It seems to me I can set the matter right in a moment, and in this way. The man swears that he is going to die upon the gallows, but if he dies upon it, he has sworn the truth, and by the law enacted deserves to go free and pass over the bridge. But if they don't hang him, then he has sworn falsely, and by the same law deserves to be hanged." "It is as the Señor Governor says," said the messenger, "and as regards a complete comprehension of the case, there is nothing left to desire or hesitate about." "Well then I say," said Sancho, "that of this man they should let pass the part that has sworn truly, and hang the part that has lied, and in this way the conditions of the passage will be fully complied with." "But then, Señor Governor," replied the querist, "the man will have to be divided into 2 parts, and if he is divided of course he will die, and so none of the requirements of the law will be carried out, and it is absolutely necessary to comply with it." "Look here, my good sir," said Sancho, "either I'm a numbskull, or else there is the same reason for this passenger dying as for his living and passing over the bridge; for if the truth saves him, the falsehood equally condemns him; and that being the case, it is my opinion you should say to the gentleman who sent you to me, that as the arguments for condemning him and for absolving him are exactly balanced, they should let him pass freely, as it is always more praiseworthy to do good than to do evil. This I would give signed with my name if I knew how to sign. And what I have said in this case is not but of my own head, but one of the many precepts my master Don Quixote gave me the night before I left to become governor of this island, that came into my mind, and it was this, that when there was any doubt about the justice of a case, I should lean to mercy, and it is God's will that I should recollect it now, for it fits this case as if it was made for it." "That is true," said the majordomo, "and I maintain that Lycurgus himself, who gave laws to the Lacedaemonians, could not have pronounced a better decision than the great Panza has given. Let the morning's audience close with this, and I will see that the Señor Governor has dinner entirely to his liking." "That's all I ask for, fair play," said Sancho. "Give me my dinner, and then let it rain cases and questions on me, and I'll dispatch them in a twinkling." The majordomo kept his word, for he felt it against his conscience to kill so wise a governor by hunger, particularly as he intended to have done with him that same night, playing off the last joke he was commissioned to practise upon him. It came to pass then that after he had dined that day, in opposition of the rules and aphorisms of Dr. Tirteafuera, as they were taking away the cloth, there came a courier with a letter from Don Quixote for the governor. Sancho ordered the secretary to read it to himself, and if there was nothing in it that demanded secrecy, to read it aloud. The secretary did so, and after he had skimmed the contents, he said, "It may well be read aloud, for what Señor Don Quixote writes to your worship deserves to be printed or written in letters of gold, and it is as follows: Don Quixote of La Mancha's letter to Sancho Panza, governor of the island of Barataria. When I was expecting to hear of thy stupidities and blunders, friend Sancho, I have received intelligence of thy displays of good sense, for which I give special thanks to heaven that can raise the poor from the dunghill, and of fools to make wise men. They tell me thou dost govern as if thou wert a man, and art a man as if thou wert a beast, so great is the humility wherewith thou dost comport thyself. But I would have thee bear in mind, Sancho, that very often it is fitting and necessary for the authority of office to resist the humility of the heart, for the seemly array of one who is invested with grave duties should be such as they require and not measured by what his own humble tastes may lead him to prefer. Dress well. A stick dressed up does not look like a stick. I do not say thou shouldst wear trinkets or fine raiment, or that being a judge thou shouldst dress like a soldier, but that thou shouldst array thyself in the apparel thy office requires, and that at the same time it be neat and handsome. To win the good will of the people thou governest there are two things, among others, that thou must do. One is to be civil to all, this, however, I told thee before, and the other to take care that food be abundant, for there is nothing that vexes the heart of the poor more than hunger and high prices. Make not many proclamations, but those thou makest take care that they be good ones, and above all that they be observed and carried out, for proclamations that are not observed are the same as if they did not exist, nay, they encourage the idea that the prince who had the wisdom and authority to make them had not the power to enforce them, and laws that threaten and are not enforced come to be like the log, the king of the frogs, that frightened them at first, but that in time they despised and mounted upon. Be a father to virtue and a stepfather to vice. Be not always strict, nor yet always lenient, but observe a mean between these two extremes, for in that is the aim of wisdom. Visit the jails, the slaughter-houses, and the market-places, for the presence of the governor is of great importance in such places. It comforts the prisoners who are in hopes of a speedy release, it is the bugbear of the butchers who have then to give just weight, and it is the terror of the market women for the same reason. Let it not be seen that thou art, even if perchance thou art, which I do not believe, covetous, a follower of women, or a glutton. For when the people and those that have dealings with thee become aware of thy special weakness, they will bring their batteries to bear upon thee in that quarter, till they have brought thee down to the depths of perdition. Consider and reconsider, con and con over again, the advices and the instructions I give thee before thy departure hence to thy government, and thou wilt see that in them, if thou dost follow them, thou hast a help at hand that will lighten for thee the troubles and difficulties that beset governors at every step. Write to thy lord and lady, and show thyself grateful to them, for ingratitude is the daughter of pride, and one of the greatest sins we know of. And he who is grateful to those who have been good to him, shows that he will be so to God also, who has bestowed and still bestows so many blessings upon him. My lady the Duchess sent off a messenger with thy suit and another present to thy wife Teresa Panza. We expect the answer every moment. I have been a little indisposed through a certain scratching I came in for, not very much to the benefit of my nose, but it was nothing, for if there are enchanters who maltreat me, there are also some who defend me. Let me know if the major domo who is with thee had any share in the Trifaldi performance, as thou didst suspect, and keep me informed of everything that happens thee, as the distance is so short. All the more as I am thinking of giving over very shortly this idle life I am now leading, for I was not born for it. A thing has occurred to me which I am inclined to think will put me out of favour with the Duke and Duchess, but though I am sorry for it, I do not care, For after all I must obey my calling rather than their pleasure, in accordance with the common saying, Amicus Plato, sed magis amica veritas. I quote this Latin to thee, because I conclude that since thou hast been a governor, thou wilt have learned it. Adieu, God keep thee from being an object of pity to anyone. Thy friend, Don Quixote of La Mancha. Sancho listened to the letter with great attention, and it was praised and considered wise by all who heard it. He then rose up from the table, and calling his secretary shut himself in with him in his own room, and without putting it off any longer set about answering his master Don Quixote at once, and he bade the secretary write down what he told him, without adding or suppressing anything, which he did, and the answer was to the following effect. Sancho Panza's letter to Don Quixote of La Mancha. The pressure of business is so great upon me that I have no time to scratch my head or even to cut my nails, and I have them so long, God send a remedy for it. I say this, master of my soul, that you may not be surprised if I have not until now sent you word of how I fare, well or ill, in this government, in which I am suffering more hunger than when we two were wandering through the woods and wastes. My lord the Duke wrote to me the other day to warn me that certain spies had got into this island to kill me, but up to the present I have not found out any, except a certain doctor who receives a salary in this town for killing all the governors that come here. He is called Dr. Pedro Recio, and is from Tirteafuera, so you see what a name he has to make me dread dying under his hands. This doctor says of himself that he does not cure diseases when there are any, but prevents them coming, and the medicines he uses are diet and more diet until he brings one down to bare bones, as if leanness was not worse than fever. In short, he is killing me with hunger, and I am dying myself of vexation, for when I thought I was coming to this government to get my meat hot and my drink cool, and take my ease between holland sheets on feather beds, I find I have come to do penance as if I were a hermit, and as I don't do it willingly, I suspect that in the end the devil will carry me off. So far I have not handled any dues or taken any bribes, and I don't know what to think of it, for here they tell me that the governors that come to this island, before entering it have plenty of money either given to them or lent to them by the people of the town, and that this is the usual custom not only here, but with all who enter upon governments. Last night going the rounds, I came upon a fair damsel in men's clothes, and a brother of hers dressed as a woman. My head carver has fallen in love with the girl, and has in his own mind chosen her for a wife, so he says, and I have chosen youth for a son-in-law. Today we are going to explain our intentions to the father of the pair, who is one Diego de la Llana, a gentleman and an old Christian, as much as you please. I have visited the market-places as your worship advises me, and yesterday I found a stall-keeper selling new hazelnuts, and proved her to have mixed a bushel of old empty rotten nuts with a bushel of new. I confiscated the whole for the children of the charity school, who will know how to distinguish them well enough, and I sentenced her not to come into the market-place for a fortnight. They told me I did bravely. I can tell your worship it is commonly said in this town that there are no people worse than the market women, for they are all barefaced, unconscionable, and impudent, and I can well believe it from what I have seen of them in other towns. I am very glad my lady the Duchess has written to my wife Teresa Panza, and sent her the present your worship speaks of, and I will strive to show myself grateful when the time comes. Kiss her hands for me, and tell her I say she has not thrown it into a sack with a hole in it, as she will see in the end. I should not like your worship to have any difference with my lord and lady, for if you fall out with them it is plain it must do me harm, and as you give me advice to be grateful, it will not do for your worship not to be so yourself to those who have shown you such kindness, and by whom you have been treated so hospitably in their castle. That about the scratching I don't understand, but I suppose it must be one of the ill turns the wicked enchanters are always doing your worship. When we meet I shall know all about it. I wish I could send your worship something, but I don't know what to send, unless it be some very curious clyster pipes, to work with bladders, that they make in this island. But if the office remains with me, I'll find out something to send, one way or another. If my wife Teresa Panza writes to me, pay the postage and send me the letter, for I have a very great desire to hear how my house and wife and children are going on. And so, may God deliver your worship from evil-minded enchanters, and bring me well and peacefully out of this government, which I doubt, for I expect to take leave of it and my life together, from the way Doctor Pedro Recio treats me. Your worship's servant, Sancho Panza the Governor. The secretary sealed the letter, and immediately dismissed the courier; and those who were carrying on the joke against Sancho, putting their heads together, arranged how he was to be dismissed from the government. Sancho spent the afternoon in drawing up certain ordinances related to the good government of what he fancied the island; and he ordained that there were to be no provision hucksters in the state, and that men might import wine into it from any place they pleased, provided they declared the quarter it came from, so that a price might be put upon it according to its quality, reputation, and the estimation it was held in; and he that watered his wine, or changed the name, was to forfeit his life for it. He reduced the prices of all manner of shoes, boots, and stockings, but of shoes in particular, as they seemed to him to run extravagantly high. He established a fixed rate for servants' wages, which were becoming recklessly exorbitant. He laid extremely heavy penalties upon those who sang lewd or loose songs, either by day or night. He decreed that no blind man should sing of any miracle in verse, unless he could produce authentic evidence that it was true, for it was his opinion that most of those the blind men sing are trumped up, to the detriment of the true ones. He established and created an alguacil of the poor, not to harass them, but to examine them and see whether they really were so; for many a sturdy thief or drunkard goes about under cover of a make-believe crippled limb, or a sham sore. In a word, he made so many good rules, that to this day they are preserved there, and are called the Constitutions of the great governor Sancho Panza. Chapter 51.